everyone, and thank you very much for coming along to this press conference this afternoon. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name is David Coleman, and I am the member for Banks in Sydney, and I'm also the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, and Multicultural Affairs. And what I wanted to do today is have a press conference with representatives of multicultural media about important issues affecting communities in Australia. So what I'll do is I'll speak for a few moments about the role and my priorities, and then I'm happy to take some questions as well. So the first thing I would say is that immigration has been overwhelmingly a very positive thing for Australia. We are very fortunate to have a society that benefits from having people who have come from all corners of the world to join us here in Australia. And that has helped to build a strong multicultural society. You know, every town in Australia, every suburb, every sporting club, every church has a immigration success story. We have so many immigration success stories, and we should be proud of that. We've built a very strong multicultural society. It's also important to note that our immigration system is non-discriminatory, and it's not based on what country people come from. It's based on the contribution they bring to our country, and that's what matters in Australia is the contribution that people bring. And so many millions of people throughout our history have brought such fantastic contributions. And those contributions are made regardless of somebody's background or their religion or their cultural grouping. It's about what people bring to Australia. And we have so many remarkable success stories. In my own electorate in Banks in Sydney, we have thousands and thousands of remarkable stories of people who have moved to Australia, who have raised their kids, who have employed people, and who have built a stronger Australia, and it's an extraordinarily large part of our success as a nation. Immigration's also been very important for our economy. So today there are about 1.4 million people in Australia who are employed by migrants. So migrants who set up a business on coming to Australia and then hired people. There's about 1.4 million people in that situation in Australia. And in fact, about 1 in 3 small businesses in Australia was started by an immigrant. So this is a very, very important part of our economic success, and we see so many examples of that around the nation. In the Chinese community, people who have immigrated from China, there's about 68,000 businesses in Australia started by people who immigrated from China, employing huge numbers of Australians, a very, very positive part of our economy. And of course, we also have people with very high levels of skills who have immigrated to Australia, who have helped to develop our economy. And in bringing those skills and in investing in Australia, they have helped to grow the economy and to create more jobs and more opportunities for the broader Australian community, which is a very, very positive thing. So we should celebrate those economic successes from our immigration program, and we should be proud of what we've achieved. We also have an opportunity in Australia to try to ensure that immigration matches our regional needs wherever possible. So there are parts of Australia at the moment where the government authorities in those areas are seeking more immigration to help grow those regions. So, for instance, South Australia is looking for about 15,000 immigrants per year to help to grow South Australia, to help to grow its economy. And there are a number of other regions around Australia with a similar view, so places like Cairns in Queensland, Warrnambool in Victoria, and also the Kalgoorlie region in Western Australia that are saying those regions saying we want more immigration to help to grow our economy. And that's something I'm looking at very, very closely at the moment. Of course, all of this occurs in an immigration program that must always reflect the choices of the Australian people and the Australian government. And that's why Our border security is very important. Our government's been very successful in ensuring that we have border security, and we can never go back to those days under the previous government of those unlawful boat arrivals, which had sadly some tragic human consequences, and that must never be allowed to happen again, and will never be allowed to happen again by this government. We have a generous refugee program in Australia. There are very few countries in the world who bring in the number of refugees that Australia does relative to our population, and that's important. And it's also important that that's done in a way which is of the choosing of Australia. So there are a number of points that I wanted to make. It is a tremendous privilege and honour to be the Minister for Immigration and Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. In my previous role in my electorate of Banks, I have a very multicultural electorate with many thousands of people who have immigrated to Australia from China, from the Middle East, from Greece, from Nepal, from India, from Vietnam, from so many places. And my electorate is a very wonderful and special place. And in working with multicultural communities over the past 5 years, I've really enjoyed that aspect of the role, and I'm looking forward to doing that even more in my new role as the Minister. So thank you again for coming along, and I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah, well, it varies from year to year. So 162,000 in the most recent year, but in terms of the permanent program, and then we also have our humanitarian program. And the other thing that's really important to note is immigration is not just permanent immigration. There's also what we call temporary immigration as well. And a good example of that is in students, so international students. So Australia's third biggest export industry is education. So the value of education to the Australian economy, exports, every year is in the most recent year, is $31 billion. And to put that in perspective, other export categories like wheat and beef are much, much smaller than education, much, much smaller. So education is really important. That's a form of temporary immigration. Of course, tourism is a form of temporary immigration too. And tourism is extremely positive for our economy. And anything we can sensibly do to promote tourism, we should do. So when we talk about the immigration program, we're really talking about lots of different programs. Within the immigration system, there's about 100 different visa classes. So it's not just one program; it's lots of different programs. So in the most recent year, it was about 16,000 refugees. Yeah. So and as I said, as a proportion of our population, the number of refugees is significant, and that's something that we do. We are a compassionate and generous nation, and we should be proud of that. Yeah. Well, look, I'd say in relation to the family program, we do have a substantial family program within the system. So within the permanent migration program, about 2/3 of the program is skilled immigration. Within that skilled program, you also have spouses and family members who are part of it, and then about 1/3 is family related. There are now a number of different policy issues in this area around parents and the temporary parents visa, which I'm looking at the moment. But we do have a generous program, and we do have a significant family intake. But as the new minister, that issue around the parents' temporary visa has been raised with me, and that's something I'm looking at. Look, I think the way to think about the immigration program, as I said, is not as sort of one program or one number. It's about so many different programs and making sure that those programs are as well structured as possible. And the Prime Minister's made this point recently, that whereas we have some areas of Australia where there's clearly more immigration needed, and where there's more immigration that the governments are calling for. So it's not so much about one number, it's about making sure that it matches our needs. It's our immigration program, and it must reflect our choices as a country. And one of those choices should be to make sure that it matches the regional needs. We have this issue in South Australia. We have an issue in agriculture where the farming community is saying that they believe that more immigration is needed, particularly in seasonal work. We have an issue in the mining industry and in a number of other industries. And we also have a need to make sure that the immigration system attracts the very best and brightest people to Australia. Because if we can recruit people to Australia who come here, who invest, who create jobs, that's a really positive thing. And that's something I'm very focused on. So it's not sort of one number, it's a whole series of different programs is the way I look at it. Yeah, well, look, we haven't made any statements about the total numbers in any particular program. But as I said, the important issue is to look at all of the different categories and make sure that they are working as effectively as possible, that they're working in the interests of Australia, and where there are ways to improve those programs, we should do so. And that's the process that I'm looking at the moment. I think the key thing with education is obviously the education-related visas and ensuring that there are those opportunities. And we've seen a significant increase in the number of people over the years coming to Australia as international students, and that's been very positive for our economy. And obviously, education is a separate matter to residency. So within education, I think it's very important that those programs exist that are attractive to international students, that we as a nation are offering education services that are appealing to those students, because, as I said, that's our third largest export industry and employs more than 100,000 people as a consequence of those international students. So my focus with regard to the student visas is very much around the student experience, which is the most important thing. Well, as I say, I think the key thing is to make sure that our educational institutions are able to offer fantastic courses, fantastic degrees, degrees that are world leading, and they do that. And that's and then we match that with a visa which allows people to come here and study. And I think that's been successful, because the evidence shows that there has been a significant number of people wanting to come to Australia to study. And we always need to consider and to make sure that we're providing courses that are that people want to study. But I think the system's been quite effective in achieving that. Well, look, it's a very important point that those visas are there for when there is a genuine skills shortage. And so what the government did a year or so ago is abolish the 457s and replace that system, replace that with a system called temporary skills shortage visas. And as the name suggests, it's about when there is a temporary skills shortage, it's appropriate to bring people in from overseas to address those shortages. But that's the only time it's appropriate, because if locals can do those jobs, then obviously the government wants locals to be doing those jobs. Now, the temporary skills shortage visa has been very successful. What we've seen there is that the average income of people on the temporary skills shortage visa is $15,000 higher than it was under the 457s. And so what that shows you is that the system is now working more effectively in identifying those skill gaps, which will tend to be higher skill jobs. And the number of those temporary skilled visas has declined especially relative to under the previous Labor government of 457s. But the actual value of them has increased because they're more highly skilled people. So that's the way, frankly, the system should work. So our view is that the temporary skills shortage visa has been very successful. Well, look, I think in relation to English, I think a vast majority of people would agree that it's obviously a good thing in Australian life to be able to speak some English. It's obviously a good thing. And clearly when people first arrive from overseas, then they may have very little English or very little English at all. But over time, it's obviously a good thing to learn English. It helps you to get more involved in community activities, helps you to get involved in your kids' schooling, and a whole range of things. So there's a lot of good reasons why it's good to pick up some English. And I think most people, the vast majority of people, do pick up English simply through being in Australia and working and so on. So I think it's important in relation to English to understand that there's a difference between saying someone should be able to speak English on the very first day that they are in Australia, and then as opposed to what happens over a number of years of being in Australia. But more generally, I think the key point is that it's a good thing to be able to speak English. That's just common sense, and I think the overwhelming majority of people would agree with that. Well, like I said, I think immigration's been really positive for Australia. Immigration has been a very good thing for our society and for our economy. And I'm looking at the immigration from the perspective of where, if there are things that can be improved, let's improve them, reviewing all the different visa classes and so on. But the key point is that we are a stronger nation as a result of immigration. We have so many success stories, in every corner of Australia through immigration, and we should be conscious of that and celebrate that. So we can always look at improving individual elements of the system, but we should also always remember that immigration has been very good for the country. Yeah, well, look, I mean, obviously the immigration policies of other countries is a matter for those other countries. What I'm focused on is Australia, and our immigration program must reflect our choices as a nation, and those choices should be to make sure that it matches our regional needs. They should be to ensure that it continues to help build our economy, and they should be to ensure, of course, that it is always open to people from all backgrounds, from all walks of life, and people are assessed based on the contribution they bring to Australia. That's what I feel very strongly about. So that's how I look at it. In terms of other countries, that's obviously a matter for those other countries. Well, like I said, I think the key point for now is just simply to note that there are gaps in regional immigration in Australia. So we know that there are opportunities to better match the system to the regional needs. And so that's something that I'm reviewing at the moment. And if we can establish a better way of matching our immigration needs to those regional areas, we should do so. And so that's what I'm looking at the moment. Obviously, I've only been in the role for a brief period of time, but reviewing those issues very carefully at the moment. All right, great. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you.